Hey, everybody, this is Faith Unaltered. I'm your host, David Russell, and I am here with Tyler Fowler, who is muted right now.
I know. What's up?
I saw you trying to intro the show, and then you were muted, so I just went with it, man.
We'll edit it out. No, I'm just playing. So what's going on, guys? I'm excited to be here to talk about the importance of the Greek New Testament. We have Dr. Bill Mounce joining us, and it is an absolute honor. It's an absolute delight to have you here with us, sir. So thank you for joining us. How's your week been going? How's everything? Anything new going on for you guys?
No, just finished the third edition of Greek for the rest of us, and just trying to, whenever you get focused on ending a book, there's about 1 billion things that pile up behind you. So I've just been digging through the stuff.
Congrats on that. David, how's your week been going?
Yeah, man, it's been a busy week. I'm a master's student for seminary, so I'm actually just got done with 3 classes, so I'm tidying up that right now. Got 4 papers done. I actually got 2 more to do, but I'll get that done next week. And I'll still meet my deadline, and
Right
maybe
on.
a little bit before the deadline. So
And
I'm excited.
Then you get a little break, right? Then you could come back in
August.
August.
After 2 more classes, I got 2 more classes that just are about to start up, and I will be off for the summer. Yeah, so I'm excited.
Where are you
for
going
that.
to school?
Trinity Theological Seminary.
Okay, up in Deerfield.
No, what is it? Indiana, the one in Indiana.
Oh, the one in Indiana. Okay.
Evansville, Indiana. I don't know if you're familiar. It's southern Indiana for the most part.
Yeah.
So, yep. But anyway, so like I said, I'm excited. Dr. Mouse, I got BBG, and it was I think 2 years ago, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Now, I'll be honest, the first time that I went through it, I didn't make it very far, but I came back, I revisited it about a year later, and I just finished up the 36th chapter. So I'm excited to have got to go through that. And I wanted to talk to you about the book. I wanted to talk to you just about the importance of the Greek New Testament. Should lay people learn this? We think that pastors, we know that pastors should be as familiar with God's word. Teachers should be as familiar with God's word as possible. And there's a video that you did, for Asbury Theological Seminary. That you answered a question. You said the question was, why do you spend so much time in the Greek? And I love your answer. You said, Greek gives me the confidence to stand in the pulpit and say, thus saith the Lord. And so the first question that I wanted to ask you is, can you kind of flesh that out for our listeners? What did you mean by that? And can they, if they decided to learn this language, because that's my ultimate goal. My goal is for people, our listeners, at the end of this video, to be able or to want to dive into the Greek. And so what did you mean by that? And can they gain that confidence?
Well, I think it's always important to stress at the beginning that translations are very good. And especially if you read a couple of them of 2 different kinds, you're doing really well. If you're reading like a CSB and an NIV, I mean, I wouldn't read an ESV and an CSB. They're too similar. But if you pick ones that are different, so one camp would be NASB, ESV, CSB, and the other would be the NIV. You're doing pretty well. It's not like you can't know what's going on. Bruce Walke says, all major translations will lead you to the cross and none will lead you to heresy. So I think it's always important to stress that up front. That's for lay people. The problem is that when you stand up in front of people, as a pastor, your job is to be a herald of the king. And a herald had 2 responsibilities. A herald had to be clear, and a herald had to be faithful to the message of the king. And that's your job description as a preacher. You're supposed to be clearly stating what the king has told you to say, the king meaning the Lord, of course. And so it's really hard to do that if you don't know what the king said. Now, even with my caveat, there's some stuff that's lost. There's discussions that you can't get into if you don't know Greek. There's a lot of things like that we can talk about. But I wanted to be I wanted to have done my homework so that without hesitation, I, as a herald of the king, could stand up and say, "Thus saith the Lord." Didn't mean I didn't make mistakes. There were Sundays I had to come back and went, that point I made, I didn't quite get it right, and let me fix it. And I mean, nothing wrong with that. But you have to be with confidence. Now, if you're the kind of I don't want to call him a preacher, but if you're the kind of person who stands up front and shares his own ideas and is there just to, get a hoop and holler and get people going, and it doesn't matter. But if you understand that as a preacher, you are a herald of the king and you have to be faithful to his message, then you have to know that message as well as you possibly can. And that's where Greek and Hebrew come in.
Right. David, is there anything that you would like to add? Or
No, go ahead, buddy. That was pretty clear. You're on a track there. I didn't want to mess your flow up there, buddy.
No. I mean, it reminds me of something you said in that same video, that a little arrogance is dangerous. Like we've all heard the proverb that a little Greek is dangerous. And so with that, I hear what you're saying. There's so many times where I've heard people, well, this is what the Greek says. So many people use that example before, but it's true. It's true nonetheless. If you can, I think that's one of the primary reasons that I wanted to learn Greek, that I wanted to really dive into it and dedicate time, because it does take, it takes a lot of time and effort if you really want to learn this. My wife, trust me, my wife is learning that as well as I am as we go through this process together. But
I spoke in something at Talbot Seminary years ago, and there were about 200 people in the room. And I started by saying, I just want you to know that I want to apologize for all the sleepless night and all the pain and all the marital conflict that I caused. And everyone was laughing and laughing. And then I said, I also want you to know that I forgive you for everything you have said about me in the darkness of your dorm room. And the room just went dead quiet. And then they realized I was joking, started snickering. But yeah, it's hard. It is hard. And I think what makes it really hard, though, is most people's ecclesiology is just not biblical. Most people think that the pastor's supposed to do everything. Every time there's someone in the hospital, the pastor goes. Now, forget the fact that there's deacons and lay people to do that. Every time the grass needs to be mowed, the pastor's supposed to do it. The poor guy that followed me at my church, they put his personal phone number on the glass front doors of the church. Call 24 hours a day. Oh, wow. And you get this concept of a church that isn't biblical at all. And most pastors just don't have time for it. So there's really a whole lot of issues involved in this particular discussion. But to take it back to your original point, when you get up and preach, and if you understand that these are the words of God, and your job is to declare the words of God, truth through personality, through your own experiences, then you better have done your homework to know what those things are, and your church better be letting you do your homework. You talked about, pastors say, well, the Greek says this, the Greek says that. This is one of my pet peeves. And I've told thousands of Greek students this over the last 30 years. Don't ever say that. Don't ever say it. Because what you're doing, either intentionally or unintentionally, you're putting yourself up as an authority. Because most people in the church can't check. And what you're saying, well, I know Greek, and so you have to believe what I'm saying. And there's all kinds of ways to say, now, when Paul wrote this, he said, or something like that. Or if you want to disagree with the translation, find another one that gets it right in your opinion. But I remember when I was in seminary, I went to a very large evangelical church and enjoyed the church. And the first Sunday, the pastor said, well, the Greek said this. And I looked down, I went, no, it doesn't. Next Sunday, the pastor said, well, the Greek says this. No, it doesn't. I did it for 6 weeks and I stopped going to the church because he didn't have a clue what he was talking about, but he was holding himself up as an authority. So there's all kinds of problems that people can get into. But if you are committed to knowing God's word, and if your church has made the commitment for you to be a biblical preacher, which takes time, then actually getting into the words is critical. I often think of, has anyone ever seen a master's program in German literature where they didn't have to know German? Well, English, I mean, the people in those fields just laugh. Of course not. If you're going to do a master's in German literature, you need to know German. You know, a master's in Chinese literature, you have to know Chinese. It's just kind of like, no duh. But when we come to the Bible, there's this like, well, seminaries are dropping Greek requirements all over the place. And you go, how are they going to be a herald of the king if they can't read what the king is saying? Right. And then along with that, then if you don't know the Greek, then what you don't know are how to read the good commentaries. And you don't know how to do Greek word studies. And you don't know how to explain why the verse you're preaching on is totally different in 3 different translations. And so, I mean, the ramifications of not having at least a functional knowledge of Greek really trickles down into many different things.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to follow that up, Dr. Bounce, with like on a scale from 1 to 10, where would you place the importance of even like laymen learning how to go through Greek? I mean, where would you put that on that scale?
Well, since I just finished writing 2 books on that topic, I do have an opinion on that. And I've gotten in trouble with some of my more purist friends for even the book's called Greek for the Rest of Us. And the problem is I hear about people saying, oh, I'm teaching my people Greek. And I'm thinking, don't do that. It's too hard. They're not going to remember it. They're not going to spend the hours and hours of memory work and review. It's unless you're a very unusual person, and there are very unusual lay people that can swallow up the language and it's not a problem.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people can't. And so I just said, well, what can I do to help people that can't spend thousands of hours in review and learning? But if they watch their humility and arrogance, can I give them some Greek that will help? And so the whole point of Greek for the Rest of Us is learn enough about Greek. It doesn't involve near the memory work, but learn enough Greek to do Greek word studies, to read better commentaries, and to be able to follow their flow of thought, and to know why Bible's translations are different. And, it's kind of like, would it be best if everyone took BBG and really learned Greek? Of course it would be, but it's not practical. And so the question is something better than nothing? And so for lay people, that's who I wrote Greek for the Rest of Us for. Let's learn enough Greek to make sense of accordance and logos and olive trees apps. See what pops up and be able to use that level of Greek for your Bible study. And it really works. So I think for lay people, something like that is a better approach than trying to swallow the whole elephant.
Sure. So there really is 2 approaches for learning Greek. I mean, you offer 2 approaches. To go in like I did with BBG, there is a lot of rote memory work. There is a lot. That's what I would kind of call diving in head first. But if you just want to dip your toes in to learn the commentaries, like you're saying, then you have Greek for the Rest of Us, which kind of, let me ask you this. What was it that made you fall in love with the Greek text? And at what point in your life did you decide to make Greek one of your primary focuses of your ministry?
Well, the interesting thing about me is I'm not a natural linguist. Languages are hard for me. Mm-hmm. Now, my kids, they just absorb languages. My daughter just finished a PhD in art history in French, married a German. She's trilingual. My older son is bilingual with Spanish and English. But that's not me. God didn't give me those gifts. And I think because he wanted me to write a different kind of grammar, a grammar written by someone that wasn't real comfortable with Greek. And what happened was I was a photography major in college, and I love photography, but I knew I wasn't going to do it. And I took my first New Testament survey class, fell in love with it, knew that I was committing to about 8 more years of school. And I said, well, if I'm going to really study the New Testament, I need to study Greek. And I just really enjoyed it. I hated Latin in high school. It just drove me nuts. Yeah. But part of it was I kept thinking there were better ways to teach it than I was being taught. And then the same thing started happening in college. I get balo, with 2 lambdas for I throw. Mm-hmm. And then we get in the second aorist and it's epsilon with a single lambda. And I would say, well, what happened? And the teacher said, well, it's an exception. Memorize it. I said, well, but I'm seeing the same exception all over the place. And I said, there can't be exceptions. There just has to be a whole other set of rules that I'm not being taught. That's what really hooked me into Greek, was the challenge. I like to simplify. I like to organize. I think that's what those are the gifts that he gave me.
Yeah.
And so I just said, there's got to be a better way of doing this, rather than just memorizing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of principal parts, when you don't really need to know that many. You just need to know the patterns. You need to know how roots change in the different tenses. And if you learn that, the memory work is a fraction. So part of it was committing myself to New Testament studies. Part of it was knowing I needed to know Greek. And then part of it just was the challenge of saying, is there another way to do this?
Yeah.
And that's what resulted in BBG. I use a lot of different grammars. I love Machen's grammar, but Machen's grammar was written for people that know Latin. I mean, it doesn't say that, but I think that's probably what it was done for. And I started doing a syllabus as I started to discover these other patterns, thanks largely to Bill Asor, another professor at Fuller. And my syllabus got to be 350 pages. Well, Machen's like about 180 or something. So I find myself, this is nuts. If my syllabus is twice as long as the book, I should write something. Yeah. And that's when I wrote BBG.
Okay. Yeah, I gotta say, I'm really impressed with it. I use it too. And one of the things that really hooked me, Dr. Mounce, is how you sung the alphabet for like help for memorization. I mean, I'm not a linguist either. I don't pick on it up that easy. It's difficult for me too. But when you started doing that, it kind of reminded me, okay, well, you know, they used to do this in the past. Right. I love New Testament studies too. They used to sing to memorize things. And I was like, that's what he's doing here. And it really hooked me. And I was like, this is amazing. This is like better than the first Greek course I ever took, So I've got to applaud that, your methods. And, it does look like it comes from somebody that trying to make this simpler and trying to make the process. And like, I remember going to churches where they would say, well, I don't care what Hebrew or Greek says. I've got the King James, and it's like, and I'm sitting there like, but that's the original language. And to me, if I'm going to be sold out to Christ, I want to know what he says, right? I want to know the original languages. I want to know everything I can, because I think God makes us puts us at our best when we are discovering things like that.
Yeah. And, it's in one of the advantages of Greek and Hebrew is that it slows you down. And I find that we try to exegete too fast. And so I have an exegetical method I use called phrasing, where you have to figure out where every single word goes in the flow of the argument. And what it does, it just slows you down. And you come across, the love of Christ constrains me. Okay. Well, what is that? Is that Christ's love for me, or is it my love for him? Well, the English can mean both. And if you look at the Greek can mean both. Well, you wouldn't know that if you didn't know Greek. And so it slows you down. It makes you ask the hard questions. What's the main thought? What are the subordinate thoughts? How did you get from point A to point B to point C? And that's another really, really good advantage of knowing the language, is you just slow down. Yeah.
I really noticed that whenever, well, I'll put it like this. I've read the Bible all the way through for the first time, right? I've only been, I think, born again for like 5-6 years. And so I did one, reading of the Bible, and I just thought it was the greatest thing ever, right? But then I started going through the Greek, and you're right, like kind of microscoping it down to a word by word, phrasing and parsing of these different terms. It really puts a new perspective on the language, on the Bible in general. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. So, but I want to stress for people that aren't going to learn Greek and Hebrew, and by the way, there's a Hebrew for the rest of us too that Lee Fields wrote. But you can get the basic gist of God's revelation fine, especially if you read two different kinds of translations. But I just can't imagine getting up and preaching hoping the translators got it right, or hoping I understood what the translators said.
Right. Absolutely. But what's even funnier than that is that, or not even funny, but what should be the thought of a Christian is, I want to know, you're on this journey of getting to know God. And I think that, like, if you're really going to give your heart to this, don't you want to know everything you possibly can? And that's I totally resonate with that.
I mean, the old story that I heard when I was just starting was, somebody falls in love with someone who speaks a different language, and for a while they have people translating their letters back and forth, but finally, the guy says, in this case of the story, the guy says, "I need to learn her language. I love her. I want to be able to talk to her."
Yeah.
It's like my daughter's married to a German. And I said, and they're both totally bilingual in English and German. And I said, "What language do you speak in?" And she goes, "We decided that since our courtship language was English, that we needed to keep our courtship language in English. There's just something about it." And so Oliver, to his credit, he's got magnificent English, but he knows English, so he can talk directly to Kirsten. He doesn't have to think about translational issues. And now Kirsten's German is good enough to be able to speak German to him. But it's, there's the love language, and the love language is Greek and Hebrew.
Yep. Let me ask you this real quick, kind of shifting, to it, kind of side shifting a little bit. We've talked about pros of learning the Greek language. Was there any cons especially for lay people, that went through your head while writing BBG?
Well, the cons are you don't spend enough time. If you take this 1 year, that's not really enough.
Right.
You need to do the 1 year, and then you need to start, don't read some layman's commentary on Romans, read Schreiner or Moo, or if you're really adventuresome, use Cranfield. But, use commentaries that push you in your Greek and in your Hebrew. And the problem is when people learn, even if they get a good grade in first year Greek, if it sits there, it's just not enough. First of all, they won't remember it. Yep. But it's also, you start losing all the, Paul says, uses an imperfect tense, and I was destroying the church. Mm-hmm. Really? Really, Paul? You thought you were destroying that against which the gates of hell will not, can't beat them? I said, that's kind of an arrogant statement. Well, I mean, you can know it's an imperfect. You can get that at the end of the first year, but do you know there's conatives and tendential and other kinds of perfect? I was wanting to, right. I was trying to, I was starting to. I mean, that's all second and third year stuff. And just because it's an imperfect doesn't really help you. Right. It's the fine tuning. And I mean, in Greek, for the rest of us, I actually covered 2 years of grammar in a 1 semester class, because I don't have to do students don't have to do all the memory work. But the real danger is, even if you learn Greek and you learn it well, that's not enough. There's way more. I'd say learning language is an art and a science. It's a science in that there's paradigms and whatnot to learn, vocabulary to learn, but it also is an art. And the art just takes time. I wrote a little book for Zondervan. I'm sure you guys know, I was the chair of the ESV New Testament for 10 years. Yeah. And then when that was done, I was out for about 3 years. And then I was talking to Robin, my wife, and I said, I really miss translation, but there's nothing I can do about that. And the next day, I got an email from Doug Moo, the chairman of the CBT committee that controls the NIV, inviting me in as a, quote, friendly critic.
Wow.
And it was like, you want to talk about God's answer. And it was, I had a senior moment. I forgot where I was going with that. Oh, and what was really interesting was that the ESV and the NIV are really different kinds of translations. And I wrote a little book for Zondervan called What I Learned About Greek Since Coming on the CBT, because there really were a lot of, the ESV, the English style was not as didn't play as big a role as it does in the NIV. The translations are all different. And just, how do I say this naturally in a way that English speakers around the world would understand? I mean, it was right. And I just kept, and I'd already had Greek for 30 years. Right. And it was a good learning curve. In fact, I didn't make any real suggestions on the NIV, at least not aggressively, for 2 or 3 years until I could kind of figure out there's a rhythm in translations, and you need to figure out the rhythm before you start trying to change things. So it was just to say, even after 30 years, I'm still learning. So, if you take 1 year of Greek, you really need to commit to 2, because at the end of 2, and then if you then make yourself read good commentaries that use Greek, then you can do a good job. But even if you just stop at 1, that's the danger point.
Right. I'm sure working for 2 different translations, it really did open up your eyes to a whole new perspective, with the text. But so let me ask you this then. Since you mentioned that, I think it'd be a good segue into this. So say somebody buys the video lecture, somebody buys the grammar BBG, somebody, they work through all of the workbook. They feel like they have a good understanding of your material. Is a first year Greek class then required on top of that? Or would you say that they've got the fundamental gist of what a first year Greek class would teach?
Oh, no. I mean, BBG actually, I've been told by a lot of teachers, it actually takes them a bit into the second year to finish it.
Okay.
My son went to Biola, and he said, "Dad, can I clep out of Greek?" I said, "I don't know. Just read the book and see if you can." And he clept out, and he took second year Greek, and he was looking at a form, and I said, he said, "What's that?" I went, "Well, it's a participle." "Oh, what's that?" I go, "Tyler, how far did you get into my book?" "Oh, I got to chapter 25 and I stopped." I said, "You read chapter 25. You not only clept out of first year Greek, but you won the second year Greek award?" He goes, "Yeah." Wow. So that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of stuff beyond BBG 1, or BBG, I should say, but there's you really do need to, and so I'm really glad Tyler did take second year. I did write a book called A Graded Reader of Biblical Greek, which is supposed to be kind of a self-study second year, and I'm just a couple of years ago I started working on the next edition. I don't know when I'll finish it, but so there's 2 things happen in second year Greek. Teachers either want to pick up Wallace's grammar and read through it, or they want to pick First John or Mark or something and just really work in it, or they do my graded reader, which is 20 different passages. But you need some kind of help to get through second year, some kind of guidance.
Okay, fair enough. And I noticed on the website there is a link to a second year Greek class. Is that something in the works that? Okay.
I taught it a couple of years ago. Yeah. I did the upgrade on the graded reader, and then I just realized I had more work that I had to do, and it's coming. Okay. But it's not. I'm hoping in a couple of years it'll be done. I'm 69, and I've set a goal to finish all my final editions, Lord willing, by the time I'm 73. So I'm on track to getting the final editions of everything done by then.
Fair enough. Can I ask this? Is it going to be like screencast like you did for BBG, going through the graded reader? Okay. Yeah.
But I'm going to use phrasing.
Okay.
Where you'll lay it out. I'm trying to think of where there might be some phrasing available. Anyway, if you go to billmounce.com and click on the menu, there's a link called Publications. And down near the bottom, there's information on phrasing. And you can go there and see what it is. But when I do the screencast, in fact, there's a lot more phrasing in BBG 4 than there ever was before that. I love phrasing. I love laying the text out graphically so I can see main thoughts, secondary thoughts, flow of the thought, that kind of stuff. So that's what I'll be doing. In fact, I don't even know if I'll do lectures for that, but I know I'll do phrasing.
Okay. I think that's one of the things that helped me the most because the first time I went through BBG, you didn't have the screencast up yet for the workbook. And whenever I went through it, just this past year, that really helped me just personally. So I really appreciate you uploading those. But yeah, so I think David, he's back. David, is there anything? You've been awful quiet, brother. Is there anything that you'd like to?
I'm enjoying the talk so far, guys.
I appreciate
it. Just coming back to me, I think maybe what would help our audience too is that maybe there's people that are getting ready for this journey, to start to study the Greek. What are some resources that person might want to have readily available when they begin that journey?
Well, if you look on that publication list, you'll see everything that I've done, and I've tried to do everything. The only thing I didn't do was a book on English grammar for Greek students, and it was Miles or someone did one. And there's a lot of English grammar in BBG, so you may not need it. But you've got the book, the workbook. You've got a laminate sheet that summarizes stuff. You have flashcards. In fact, I just finished the latest edition of the electronic flashcard program I wrote. And as soon as I can figure out how to make a Windows installer, shady willikins, trying to get it so it doesn't come up unidentified publisher. It's not an easy task. If anyone out there knows, will you let me know? But anyway, it's a program that flashes the words at you, and you can mark which ones you know and not, and stuff like that. That's really everything you need. I would go to my site and sign up for the Monday with Mounce blog. It's all free, but it's just it's encouragement. These are the kind of things you're going to be able to understand about Greek when you are working through, or when you're done with BBG. The guy at Southern Seminary, Daily Dose of Greek, does a really, really good job. Yeah. And that's he's more for second year Greek to help people encouraged to keep doing their working. But so there's a lot of tools like that out. But in terms of first year, I think I've tried to do everything I can think of that would help people. Yeah. Plus, there's the free online class. I mean, you have to pay for the lectures, but there's a lot of free stuff on the online class, including mnemonics and singing silly songs and all kinds of stuff. It's not me singing. It's a friend of mine, by the way. I would sing like that, but I can't.
It definitely helps it stick. I will say this. I enjoyed the silly mnemonic devices.
Absolutely.
Especially for the square stops.
Have you seen my Greek word of the day?
I have. Yes, that's what I was going to ask. It was on the YouTube channel, right?
Yeah.
And I noticed that there wasn't an upload for a little bit.
Somebody said you should make it the Greek word of the week. Things take forever. I did just finish all of the words using the vocabulary that's in Greek for the rest of us. Okay. And then I'm going to release it. Bible Gateway is going to send it out as a newsletter, but you can also go on the playlist and do that as well. And I'm just starting now to work on a totally different set of Greek words of the day using the definitions in BBG. And I think I got about 100 of them. Yeah, I forget to go on and turn those things on. I just get busy. But anyway, it's coming. But, it will be really nice when Bible Gateway is you'll be able to sign up for a newsletter and just get one a day. And that'll be good.
Now, the vocab in BBG, it's the words that are used 50 times or more.
Right.
In the Greek New Testament.
Right
on. Yes, go sign up for that. I love Mondays with Mounce. I mean, that's you offer just in-depth content, and I've learned a lot from you. And again, I really appreciate you taking your time to come on here and kind of talk with us. As we're winding down. I mean, is there really anything for our listeners that we haven't touched on that you just feel like you need to say to them whenever it comes to this topic, whenever it comes to the importance of really learning the language?
Well, I mean, to get back on something you said earlier, it's not a little bit of Greek that's dangerous. It's a little bit of ignorance and arrogance. I'm sorry, not ignorance, arrogance. It's a little bit of arrogance that, anyone who's humble before the Lord and is learning a language knows that they're just learning the language. And when people start throwing around, well, the Greek says this, especially from the pulpit, there's almost always some kind of insecurity at work in there. My son actually came to me once when I was pastoring and said, "Dad, will you teach us some Greek? You never say Greek." And I said, "Well, that's all on purpose, Tyler. I don't want people to believe it because I say it. I want people to believe the sermon because they read the text and they decide that's what the text says." So it's arrogance that gets in the way so often. And, just be careful. I remember teaching a class once where a guy came up with an interpretation of a Greek grammatical construction, and it was completely and totally wrong. And I was trying to think of how to say that nicely. And I said, well, it may be the case, but I don't know of a single commentary that says that. Does that bother you? And he goes, no. I thought, whoa,
Wow.
that's unbridled arrogance. To think that of all the scholars and all the translators and all the grammarians that have never come up with that interpretation, that somehow you're right and everybody else is wrong.
Yeah.
So when you're learning Greek, just remember you're learning it. And, it's like when you learn any language, it just takes time. My favorite story, I hope this is okay to tell, but I was learning German and I went to Schwäbisch Hall to learn it. And I tried to teach it to myself, and I just never was sure I was right. So I went to Schwäbisch Hall. And one day I want to say I'm cold. And anyone who knows German knows where I'm going with this. And I said, well, I see. I was with a bunch of my friends who knew a lot more German than I did. And I said, well, I is ich, bin is am, and cold is kalt. So I am cold would be ich bin kalt. So I proudly announced ich bin kalt. My friends, it was late in the fall, they hit the floor rolling hysterically in laughter. And I went, well, no, ich bin kalt. It's what I said. And obviously it's not what I said. When they finally stopped laughing, I said, what did I say?
Yeah.
And they said, Bill, you said you're sexually frigid. And it turned out the opposite, ich bin warm. You can imagine what that means. And in fact, a buddy of mine said, the same idiom is in French. He took the words I am warm and said them in French, and the girls slapped him.
Wow.
You have to be careful that when you know just the rudimentary parts of a language, not to think that you know the language. It just takes time. Takes time. So, at least Greek for the rest of us, get good commentaries, understand them, stick with them, and don't go off on your own. It'll just get you in trouble every time.
That's proof in the pudding that syntax is absolutely necessary. You can't just learn the fundamentals. But, we did have an audience question. I got a couple of them before we did this. And Nicholas Sulliner wanted to know, is there an affordable Greek lexicon that you recommend?
The big one is Bauer, Danker, Art, and Gingrich, affectionately known as BDAG.
Yep.
And it's ridiculously expensive. It's like $160 now. But 2 editions back, the cover was green. We always designate them by the color of their covers. And the green one is the one I use for my doctoral work. And it's $10. You can find it on eBay at places. It's just fine. It's just fine. And if you're going to do published academic PhD work, then you need to bring the 150 to get BDAG. But I would go look for, what would I be called? Bauer, Art, and Gingrich.
Okay.
And then the next edition was Bauer, Art, Gingrich, and Danker, because Danker did the revisions. It's hard to say bagged. Yeah. And then Danker did a real revision and put his name first. So he's, after Bauer, so BDAG. But Bauer, Art, and Gingrich, green cover, kind of a lime green, ugly cover. And you can pick it up cheap. And it's a good Greek dictionary.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
David, any kind of...
I know we kind of covered this, but I wanted to just bring it out to the forefront for someone before they start taking Greek. I mean, what is the most important advice that you could give to a layman before they take that next step?
Get your sleep.
That's your sleep.
No. The number one impediment to learning Greek is lack of English. And it's what catches almost everyone who doesn't know their English grammar well. So especially before you go into a class, then get an basic English grammar. Like I said, there's a book. It's like English for students learning a foreign language. It's something like that. And you need to know what a noun is and a predicate nominative and an object of a preposition and what aspect is. And what happens so often is that you can see people and they're not even struggling with the Greek in class. They can't figure out what a possessive case is. So get your English down. That's the hands down the most important thing that you can do. And then you just got to commit to doing it regularly. You can't cram for a language. It's unless you're a brilliant person like my kids, you cannot cram for a language, because language takes time to sink in. And in chapter 5, I made an offhanded comment about the fog. It turns out it was one of people's most favorite comments in the whole book. Because what I say is you finish let's say chapter 6, and you're not really sure, it hasn't really sunk in. And so people tend to sit on chapter 6. I go, no. The fog in chapter 6 isn't going to lift until you're in chapter 8. Yeah. So you just keep plodding through. And then when you get in chapter 8, look back at chapter 6, you go, oh, well, that's easy. What was my problem?
Right.
So you have to do it regularly. You cannot cram, and just stay at it. Don't. The people that struggle most with languages are engineers, because it's got to be perfect, 100% perfect before they can move on. And, when they're making their circuit boards, I'm glad that's their personality.
It's their perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. But they're not going to get it perfect if they sit on it. You have to push on. You have to be uncomfortable with that, because you have to give it time, and you give it time by going on learning other stuff. And it's frustrating. You always feel like, do I know anything? Well, just go back 2 chapters. Now, if you don't know 2 chapters back, you're in trouble. Right. But most likely you go back and go, nominative, accusative, that's easy. What was my problem? I didn't know what case ending was. Well, I do now, so it's not a big deal. Right. So just plug away at it.
Do you think the reason...
Now, like for an apologist and people that like work in the apologetics field like I do, how vital would you say it is for us to know this Greek, to actually, because I know like one of the things that really brought me to the Greek and brought me to your classes and stuff like that was I had to know when I was defending John 1:1, and defending, the Gospel of John. And the reason I fell in love with it, and I fell in love with the Greek in general, was because of how careful John is and how he uses his language, I guess, as far as,
He's very precise. Dan Wallace and I were down in Houston a couple of weeks ago, and I made a typical first-year Greek statement, because you're always trying to simplify stuff. Amy's a state of verb is like drawing an equal sign. You go, well, it's not quite an equal sign in John 1:1. He goes on this long discussion, but it's an important distinction, because Jesus is not everything that God is. Right? Because there's God the Father and there's God the Holy Spirit. And that's all wrapped up in a state of verb in the order of the words. But, it comes up in a lot of places. I just finished a book on why I trust the Bible. And one of the issues you have to deal with is apparent contradictions. And one of the really easy ones is the order of the temptations. In Matthew, it's turn stones to bread, then jump off the temple, then worship me. Luke flips the order of the second and third. It's turn stones to bread, worship me, jump off the temple, which really sounds anticlimactic. But people will use that as an excuse. Well, if you know the Greek, you can look at it. And in Matthew, it's the conjunctions that are so important. In Matthew, it's turn stones to bread. Then he said, jump off the temple. And then he said, basically, worship me. Luke doesn't have the connectives. And all you have to do is look at the connectives. And Luke is, as it were, saying, okay, now there was one temptation. It was turn stones to bread. Now there was another temptation. It was worship me. Oh, and there was another temptation. It's jump off the Temple Mount. And from a literary standpoint, in Luke, prophets only die in Jerusalem. And so the temptation that was centered in Jerusalem was, from a literary standpoint, the most important. So he just uses different connectors. You're not going to see that if you don't know Greek. Right. So it really does come up in quite a few different places. Does Romans 9:5 call Jesus God? Well, if you don't understand how punctuation works, or it didn't work in Greek, you should say, that's going to be a problem. Is Jesus called God in Titus 2? Absolutely. Absolutely. But you have to know Greek to know that.
Right. It's the same concept with Hebrews 1:8. Is hatheos a predicate nominative? Is it a subject, or is it a nominative vocative? And so, like you said, you don't get that unless you you do know the language.
Yeah.
Real quick, I want to go back to something you said about the fog. Do you think that the reason it starts lifting, so to say, from earlier chapters, the later you get into them, is that because you're seeing the things that you learned before in different contexts? You know, that it kind of opens it up a little bit than seeing it over and over again in the same format, so to say.
That certainly is part of it. I mean, if you struggle with the knowledge of accusative case in chapter 6, by the time you get to chapter 10, you're not even thinking about it any longer because you've seen those two cases over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But the other thing that happens, though, and it usually happens somewhere around chapter 17 to 18, is that people start learning how to learn. For a monolingual culture, most people don't know how to learn another language. They're so stuck in an English way of thinking that thinking in other ways is just really, really hard for them. And so you start learning how to learn. At that point, it's just the mass of data you have to hold in your head. It's a different problem. But it does get easier as you get going. That's for sure.
Right on. David, any last things?
Man, I just wanted to say, like, I know, I've interviewed Gary Habermas, and has a lot of his stuff out there for free too. And I just want to thank you for being like that and wanting to get this stuff out there for people and bringing forth these type of things. People, this is Bill Mounce. He has done this. He has given you free materials, and for that's what it kind of inspired me to see what you and Gary did. It inspired me when I started my shows to give these conversations free to people, like saying, hey, look, if you're struggling with your faith, if you have these doubts, check our show out, listen to the two sides of the debate, and then choose at the end of the day, but it was just an inspiration. I just wanted to thank you for putting all the things for free that you do put out there. It's an amazing thing.
Thanks. Do you know about biblicaltraining.org? Speaking of free,
I was going to say you're the president and founder of that.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Go ahead.
The whole point of biblical training is to get world-class instruction back into the church everywhere, which means it has to be free. Yep. And so we go get the very, very best people in their fields. Walkie did Proverbs and Psalms. Mood did Romans. Keener did Matthew. I mean, it's just on and on. So we record them and we put them on the website and give away for free. So there's, sometimes you have to charge, and that's fair. There are situations where that has to be. You have to take care of your family, put food on the table. But biblical training is my passion for the last 20 years. We got 145 classes, 2,300 hours worth of instruction from just the best of the best teachers. Yeah. And you can get it on your app and download it and take it to the middle of Africa where there's no internet and still get the instruction. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in free, in God's economy. He takes care of it.
Absolutely. You said that's biblicaltraining.org, and there's an app actually on the Play Store, and I think in Apple as well.
Yep. Is that correct? Yeah, we have them in both places. Yeah.
Right on.
So if you guys don't want to be heretics, just listen to what he just said. No, I'm just joking.
Go to billmounce.com, right?
Or at least to biblicaltraining.org.
Oh, yeah, biblical training, yep.
Where else, is there any place else that people can find you? billmounce.com, biblicaltraining.org. Is there anywhere else?
I mean, I've done a lot of these kinds of podcasts, but those are the only two places I publish my material.
Okay.
There's a professor at Gordon University it's biblical e-learning, and I gave him some of my stuff. There's a lot of other really good stuff on that site as well. And there's Third Mill. I mean, there's good sites out there that are trying to do the same thing. Third Mill is mostly focused on the majority world and doing a lot of work with translations and stuff. So there's lots of good resources out there.
Right on. We will, David, don't forget to add those to the description so people can find them easily whenever we post this. But again, Dr. Mounce, I just wanted to thank you. One more thing real quick.
Sure.
You mentioned it earlier. I don't know if you want to plug it a little bit more, but you just released a book, Why I Trust the Bible.
Yeah, I'll plug it.
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, it was. I've been fortunate enough to be able to speak around the world, and it doesn't matter where I go. This is the question.
Yeah.
I remember being in South Africa with Bob Yarborough, and I had like 100 people showing up for the normal lectures. We opened up one night, and 600 people showed up, and all they wanted to know was, can they trust the Bible? And so there's 2 classes on biblical training. I did one. It's called Why I Trust My Bible. And then there's a more advanced one called Why We Trust Our Bible. And it's got Dan Wallace on text criticism, just Craig Blomberg on contradictions, Kruger on canon, all these kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff like that. But, I just get the Bible is being attacked in a way that it's never been attacked before. Kids by the thousands are losing their faith when they go to college, and their parents are sitting there going, I don't know what to do. Well, there's more mistakes in the Bible than in the Greek manuscripts than there are words. When you hear stuff like that from Ehrman, Professor Ehrman, and it's scary. And we don't have copies of the manuscript. So how can we trust the ones that we have? I mean, these things are all these questions being raised all over the place. So that's why the book was written. So it deals with historical Jesus. It deals with that the Gospels do accurately reflect who Jesus is. It deals with apparent contradictions. It deals with canon, why we have the books of the Bible that we do. It deals a lot with text criticism and why we can trust the manuscripts. And it deals with translations. And then I did some work on Old Testament, mostly on the character of God as a just God, and why were the Canaanites killed and stuff like that. So It's called Why I Trust the Bible. Zondervan published it. It's everywhere you can get a book.
Right on. Right. I want to get it. I really do. David,
well, yeah, it is important these days, and. Man, you hit the nail on the head, and I see it in every day. Lies can travel halfway around the world before, truth gets a chance to put its boots on, as they say. And, you look at a meme, and some of these guys, they grab a meme, and it's got these, like, facts on them, so to speak. And, they're just, when you actually do your research on them,
right.
There's no primary source. There's, no reason for people just to come up with this nonsense. And it's a lot. We have our hands full as New Testament scholarship. And just to put that out there, with your book and, the other ones that come out and channels like ours, we're here to fight this. We're here to combat this. If good philosophy exists because bad philosophy has to be answered, like Lewis said, so it's just there's that element, and the
answers are not that hard. Even the really technical issues, the answers are really straightforward. Professor Ehrman will say that there's 400,000 mistakes in the Greek manuscripts, and there's only 138,000 words. Well, what he doesn't talk about is the significance of those mistakes. Because according to the Greek text that I use, there's only 373 words that are in question in the entire Bible.
Yeah,
373 words.
Yeah, doesn't Wallace put it at like only 40 lines are unresolved?
Yeah, he says it's normally said it's 0.1%. He actually says it's 0.04%. But when I look at you look at the footnotes in English Bibles that mark where there's manuscript issues, or in our Greek text, the Nestle Aland only lists 373 words that they're not completely sure are original. So it's easy to say that without having to learn Greek and getting a dissertation in text criticism. And that's what the book's trying to do. It gives basic, quick answers, and then if you want to go deeper, it goes deeper as well.
Well, really, it's not fair. They're holding the New Testament really to a standard they won't hold anything else to, right? At the same time.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah,
so it's really there.
It's kind of like Jesus mythicism. I was just shocked when I first started reading that there are people that actually think Jesus never existed. It's kind of like, the single most important influential person in the history of the world, regardless of your faith, and you don't think he existed?
Right.
And there's plenty of historical evidence. They'll say, there's no historical evidence. I said, well, you better go read Josephus. It's there.
They haven't looked for it.
And 3 Latin authors. I mean, it's kind of like, just you do your homework.
Yeah, and that's the thing, man, is a lot of people refuse to do that. I think they like to stand on what they don't want to be true sometimes, or
Right.
whatever sounds fanciful, as Blaise said, Pascal. But yeah, Tyler, I'll hand it back over to you.
I mean, just one more question. And again, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Do you think that's one people like Professor Ehrman, because it's not just him, there's so many more people that's promoting the same kind of philosophy. Is that one of the biggest challenges Christianity face today in our culture now? Or if not, what do you think it is?
Well, at an academic level, he is the challenge.
Okay.
And, I've been told he's a really nice guy. I have no reason not to believe that. I know people that have known him for years. Apparently, he's a really nice person.
Yeah.
But he is a fierce debater and an aggressive critic of Christianity. Mm-hmm. And, whoever would have thought a book on text criticism would make New York Times bestseller list.
Right.
So he's the one that's really spearheading at a popular level, but he's such a phenomenally good scholar that when he says things, it tends to carry a lot of weight. But the problem is, in one place, you'll say that there's no biblical doctrine that's brought into question by text critics. And then another time I watched on the YouTube debate he had with Dan Wallace, he said, well, yeah, the doctrine of the humanity of Christ, the divinity of Christ, whether Jesus was an angry person or not, these are all in question. The Trinity. And it's kind of like, these are just hard to deal when that's what's going on. But it's not just that. It's that our whole culture, Western culture, is so post-Christian at this point that there's not going to be any, what's the word? No one's going to give us, it must be right. They're going to say, no, it must be wrong. That's the culture.
Yeah.
And, I used to... I remember when the key word was diversity, and I got a little tired of diversity. I longed for the days of diversity, because now it's only whoever's in power. It's their opinion, and no one else is going to be listened to. It's kind of like, how can you have an intelligent, informed conversation about things that matter when that's the culture? So it's just not Professor Ehrman. It's the whole cultural shift has just gone crazy. Right. And anyway.
Yep. And one of the ways to combat this, people, is BBG.
Learn Greek.
There you go. I like that.
All right. All right, Tyler, go ahead, man.
Well, no, I just, in closing, I think, kind of looking at everything, from a practical level, this is what we're facing. Yeah. And it's not going away. It's not going away anytime soon. No. And for scholars, for teachers, for pastors, even for the lay people, I think if you call yourself a Christian, you need to be as familiar with God's word as you can. Right. And I love the way you said it. Translations are great. Translations are wonderful. I've learned lots from translations, but I'm finding that going through BBG and now taking on, Dr. Wallace's book or his grammar, it's challenging, but I find it so, it's so beneficial. It really helps you grow, I think, as a Christian, as a believer in Christ. My faith strengthens every day, from learning Greek from Dr. Wallace. And so I'm so appreciative of it, Dr. Mounce. And so thank you for that.
I'm really glad you enjoy it and you're learning and growing.
Absolutely.
That's the whole point.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in. This has been Faith Unaltered. We've got a good day lined up for the rest of the day. And so make sure to check out our debate at 7:30 tonight. Is Christianity true? And we will see you next time. See you guys.